The fourth edition of the Africa Resilience Forum, organized by the Africa Development Bank, brings together stakeholders in Africa's growth and development. The theme of this year's forum is COVID-19 and beyond, working together for a resilient continent. Earlier, I spoke to Hindou Oumarou Ibrahim, an environmental activist and coordinator of the Association of Peul Women, and discussed the opportunity for Africa to build resilience in tackling challenges relating to the environment and climate change. All right, Hindou, thank you very much for your time. As we begin to reflect on the impact of climate change as we try to build a more resilient African continent, I want us to start with reflecting on a real example. The Lake Chad region has been described by the Africa Development Bank in the past as a living example of the devastating effects of climate change. And can you start with that and help us appreciate why we need to take this seriously?
Absolutely. The report of the African Development Bank, it's true, because when my mom get born around 1960, Lake Chad used to be 25,000 kilometers square of the fresh water. And just when I get born, 90% of this water evaporated, disappeared. And then now we have between 2,000 or maybe 3,000, depending from the rain season, of the water. And you have more than 40 million people living and depending for his fragile ecosystem. Between them, you have farmers, you have fishermen, and of course, my community, who are the pastoralists, nomadic community living and depending from his lake. And we are seeing in our eyes that how the Lake Chad is vanishing and how the ecosystem that's surrounding it is also disappearing. So it is the concrete example of the climate change. And that's also why it is very urgent, because we don't have time. We are seeing what is happening right now.
Right.
And we already reached the Paris Agreement objective, who is plus 1.5 degrees around all the Sahel region.
Well, speaking of the Paris Agreement, you are involved with the World Indigenous Peoples Initiative and Pavilion at COP 21, 22, and 23. Help us appreciate the importance of those activities in the context of Africa.
Firstly, we need to understand that indigenous peoples represent only 5% of the world's populations living in all the continents around the world. But indigenous peoples protect 80% of the world's biodiversity, which is really huge. And for Africa, you have the indigenous peoples living around the Sahara, around the savannas, the tropical forests, and all the rest of the ecosystem, even around the oceans, on the islands. So that's mean for us, the Indigenous Peoples Initiative and the under the UNFCCC, the Convention on the Climate Change, is very important because of the role that we are playing. I give you the examples. The indigenous peoples from the Congo Basin, all my brothers and sisters from the Pygmy peoples, they know how to protect this ecosystem of the forest, where they can keep the traditional medicine, where they can hunt in a natural way to keep the balance of all those forests. Their land is most diverse ecosystem. When you come to my communities around all the Sahel region, our land is really the most protected one, because while we are moving from one place to another one, we are giving the break to the ecosystem to get regenerate in a natural way.
Right.
So those initiatives, and of course, when we talk about it, we talk about the local communities and indigenous peoples platform, help us to have those traditional knowledge to be gathered and include international plan, our national adaptation plan or national mitigation plan of our African countries to fasten the solution.
I want you to now speak to how we can better coordinate activities in this respect. With respect to climate change on the African continent, how do you think Africa can better organize itself?
I think Africa have a huge potential to show the rest of the world around all the resilience and adaptation of his communities. Because when Africa take the indigenous people's traditional knowledge, you can take the communities who are in a very remote areas, without access to electricity or to clean water, but they always know where to get water, where to get food. They're already adapting to all this climate change effect, and they're already resilient with all the change that we are experiencing, from the flood to the drought, because they do not have any other solution than just to observing the nature that's surrounding them. So African countries must use that as a big opportunities to have it as an indigenous technology, who are very old than all the rest of the science, who are the modern one, and then lead the way with it. So Africa can include those knowledges into all the national plan, into the national strategy. Africa can work with the indigenous peoples from each country in order to have them as partners, as actors, not only as a victim where we wanted to describe the impact. And that might lead us to access to the funding in order to have an adaptation method and a mitigation method that the indigenous peoples can help the countries,
right,
companies, civil society to make it a reality.
It's an important point you make about access to funding and other support from the ecosystem relating to climate change. But let's talk about governance, because I think it starts from there. If we cannot create an accountability system, it's unlikely you're going to get all that help from the various stakeholders in trying to improve the climate. So speak to us on that. How do we better organize the governance structures in individual countries and potentially across borders in Africa?
When we create a best governance transboundary, where the legislations that can have all the countries that sharing the same natural resources, that can help the better implementation and the sustainability. But how they can do that? I think they have to go back to the natural, to the traditional way of having the alliance between the countries and communities that living and depending from the same ecosystem. When you take the countries of the Congo Basin, you have 11 countries that come all together. So why not to have a legislation that can engage all of them in the same level? When you take the Sahel regions, they can have also the same. When you take the East African regions, they can also have the same. I'm not talking about the government way of having ECOWAS or whatever, no. I'm talking about that the ecosystem that can be transboundary, that can be also have the cultural and identity way of the communities.